Hey everyone, happy Monday. I'm here to tell you infrastructure matters. You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hey everyone, it's me, Alan Schimmel, CEO, founder here at Techstrong. We've got a really special Techstrong Gang for you today. We're going to introduce some new gang members, and we're doing a bit of a mashup. You know, as you probably have heard, Techstrong Gang is joining up with the Futurum Group, and we're so excited to have just a murderer's row lineup of analysts to help to join us in producing content and getting information out to you about what we're doing. Today, we're going to do something we haven't done before. I hope it works. You'll be the judge. But we've invited the group from the Infrastructure Matters podcast to mash up and join us on Techstrong Gang today and do a joint session, if you will, a joint broadcast covering what Infrastructure Matters talks about, which is a lot of cloud and infrastructure, as well as the usual Techstrong Gang, what's new in the world of tech today. So we're real excited, but we're doing this kind of without a net on a high wire, so forgive us if we maybe fall here and there or hold on tight. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Let me introduce you to our gang and the Infrastructure Matters gang today here as well. First of all, he's actually been with us. He was on our Techstrong Gang show earlier or last week. He's one of the head dudes over at Infrastructure Matters. It's Stephen Dickens. Hi, Stephen. Welcome.
Hey, Alan. I feel like a gang member proper now. The bandana's not come through in the post yet.
The bandana's coming. It's coming. Just you can't wear it on the street, Steve.
I know. So just to get the listeners and viewers orientated here, Infrastructure Matters is a podcast that Camberley and Krista and I do every week. What are we up to now? Episode 41 is the latest one that's in the can. So we've been doing this a while. And we cover everything from an infrastructure and security perspective, really for that CIO, CTO lens, whether that's cloud infrastructure, on-prem infrastructure. Camberley does a great job as every week bringing us what's going on in the world of storage and data. Krista brings a fantastic perspective. She was out at RSA recently, but gives us that fantastic perspective of how we should be thinking about things like data protection and security. I tend to stumble through talking about the news around what's going on with cloud. So, I mean, Camberley and Krista, anything you would add and sort of introduce yourselves there?
I think you got it covered, Stephen, but it's been it's been a lot of fun. We kind of like cut it up a bit on the podcast, so it's not all serious and dry, and we try to bring some light to actually what's happening in the market with infrastructure, because our guys that do servers, storage, security, and cloud and all that kind of stuff, they really matter.
Yeah, for sure.
So Camberley, by the way, it's Camberley Bates. Camberley joins us from Boulder or near Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder. Right now I'm sitting in California, so there you go.
Oh, okay.
Oh, she's not here. Okay.
But Camberley, we, this is your first time on the gang. Our audience may not be familiar. Beyond doing this podcast, what else do you do over at Futurum?
Over at Futurum?
Yeah.
So beyond that, I'm considered an analyst. I run the data infrastructure group that is at work there. Very involved also with the Futurum Labs, which is actually called now Signal 6.5, that team, because that team, before they brought us on board, my company like yours, Alan, we had a great lab that was doing a lot of data center testing, et cetera, in Boulder, Colorado. So that team I'm very, very much so involved with as well. So anything to do with data pipeline now that's hyped up with AI. Yes, we talk AI all the time. You forgot about that, Stephen. That's what I'm involved with.
We went 5 minutes without talking about AI.
Oh my God.
Kimberly gets the prize. She's the first AI person this week. 5 minutes in. Yeah. We've done better, but Kimberly, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you continue participation here as a Techstrong Gang member. Stephen, you mentioned Krista Maycumber. We've worked with Krista. Actually, she was out in San Francisco at RSA with us, but she's home now in New Hampshire. Krista, welcome. And Why don't you give people a little bit of your background as well?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I'm very excited to be here today. So I came into Future, actually part of Kimberly's team, at the beginning part of 2023 through the acquisition of the Evaluator Group. I was our point on anything and everything data protection. So that is still very near and dear to my heart, and sort of, what I would really consider my wheelhouse. But lately, I've really had this exciting opportunity to kind of become our point on from a kind of a research advisory and an intelligence standpoint on anything and everything related to cybersecurity. So obviously, as we've been talking about, data security is certainly kind of a big part of that. But I'm really looking into other areas like identity and access management, even security of, applications and kind of software code. And really kind of the Security Operations Center. I know little preview, one of our topics today is going to be discussing the acquisition of IBM QRadar by Palo Alto Networks. So that's really kind of beginning to fall square in my wheelhouse. And kind of last week, RSA, it was really great to meet with a whole bunch of companies across the security spectrum. And as you mentioned, I kind of got to film a couple of videos for Techstrong.
Very cool. Welcome to Techstrong Gang. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much.
Last but not least, joining us, he is in Denver. Well, he is in Colorado today. Our CTO and Techstrong Research Principal Analyst, Mitch Ashley. Hey, Mitch, welcome.
Always good to be here. I feel like if we had Krista and Kimberly in Colorado, we'd have a quorum.
Well, I think it would be the first Colorado majority gang show, but
it would be. Yeah.
We don't.
Soon we'll do that.
Absolutely, one day. All right, guys, let's jump into it, though. Our first topic is, we're mixing a little bit of politics and cloud. And we're calling it the cold cloud war, right? And it's apropos, I think Putin was in China this week, meeting with Xi and making all plans for world domination or what have you. But at the same time, this, I forget, unentanglement or decoupling or whatever you want to call that's going on with the Chinese economies and the U.S. and Western economies to some extent is having a ripple effect into the cloud. You've got folks who, were moving to China as part of a global cloud infrastructure, right? Teams are thinking maybe it's time to get out while the getting's good, or I don't want to be here if things don't go well politically. I hate when politics gets in the way of our technology, but it's a fact of life. Guys, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, the world's bifurcating. Whatever you think of that from a political perspective, it's a reality. I think from a cloud perspective, Alibaba and Tencent are huge local providers. They certainly rank in the top 20 global IT companies. I think very different political system over there, very different rules and regulations. So those local providers have really grown, not really grown that internationally, Alibaba and Tencent, but have certainly grown to capture that market locally. Then you look at what we would, from the West, consider maybe the 5 big hyperscalers, obviously the AWS, the Microsofts, the Googles, the OCI, and IBM, less so in China. So I think we're starting to see sovereign clouds, and that's our next topic that we're going to cover. But I think no surprises for me that local providers are capturing that market, and maybe Western-based providers are thinking twice about whether they continue to invest.
But let's, call it what it is. It's a huge market. This isn't Luxembourg we're talking about, right? It is China where, you've got 600 or 700 million cell phones. You got almost 1.5 billion people. It's a huge market. And I have two views on it. Having been in China a number of times myself, it's too big to fail, right? In terms of a market for the world to it can't be just for Chinese companies. It's not right. Unless you're going to say China can't compete on any foreign companies outside of China then, right? So there's got to be, we can't, I'm a globalist, I guess, by nature, but that's a huge market, number one. Number two, we all lose when the internet gets bifurcated and segregated. You want to have different political systems. You want to do whatever you're doing, great. But the internet works best, I think, as a global marketplace. We can't have, or a global network, we can't have mini internets all over the place that don't somehow work together. I mean, we can, and we may very well will as a result of politics, but we all lose as a result.
I
right?
think we're there already, aren't we,
less
Alan?
richer.
I mean, we're there already. The Great Firewall of China is up. You know,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
can't.
but you know what? Yes, the Great Firewall's up, but when you go to China and you hang out with, and we had partners in China, DevOps Institute. They pay, they're all on VPNs and whatever they're on. They don't pay much attention to that firewall. And yes, they did have that Great Firewall of China, and they still do. But there was always the illusion that the Western cloud providers could somehow compete there. The same way Tesla makes cars there. The same way BMW does too. If it's not a two-way street, should there be any street? It can't just be a one-way street, I guess is what I'm saying.
So if I take a perspective
go ahead, let Krista. I'm sorry,
Kimberly.
So if you take it from perspective of maybe the other technologies that are out there, we see people like NetApp having relationships with other parties to move products into China. We see, at one point in time, Huawei's had relationships with all kinds of other people to, co-bring products in. I mean, today, and we track Huawei because they're very dominant, not dominant, but they're a very, very strong player in in Europe, in our clients over in Europe, and where they're blocked out from really doing anything here in the United States. They're trying to, but they can't get in. They're not going to because of the security issues that the U.S. has about Huawei's, all of their technologies coming in here. So I think that there are other ways that people go into is usually with some sort of co-relationship of some sort. Some of those have worked. Some of them have not worked. So I think there's, they're looking for different ways to go around here, but at the same time, they are also still concerned about IP. And that's a real big threat about having IP from the United States stolen by them. They can be disrespectful on that front.
That's exactly the point I want to tag on. Because I was going to mention, we've been battling this IP challenge, right? There's theft of IP. That's gone on for decades now with China. It seems like IP plus the addition of AI and investment in that maybe is one of the things that's the tipping point of saying, well, maybe we don't want all of our Microsoft folks over there or whatever folks from U.S. kind of origin countries. So it seems like the war around AI is part of the deciding factor of pushing us apart as well. Now, these things tend to be pendulums, right? Yeah, we're moving apart today. Will we move back together? To Stephen's point, and Alan, the dollar will bring us back together because the market's just too big there.
Well, it's interesting that, my perspective, I think it's AI and data, that access to data is crucial. But Krista, I'm keen to get your perspective. You kind of track this from a cybersecurity perspective. I think a lot of this is we've got nation states fighting with each other from a cybersecurity space. I know you're our kind of resident expert here. I think that's got to be part of the discussion, right?
It really does. And I think that that's probably one of the linchpins that's really kind of changing the conversation today, in addition to what we've been discussing on the technology side, artificial intelligence and things like that. I remember I was at Huawei's Analyst Summit out in Shenzhen back in 2015 and was dealing with a lot of what we've been talking about. The Great Firewall could only really get on things like Google through my VPN and things of that nature. So it's something that has been, in place for quite some time at this point. But, certainly as the nation state actors from a security perspective, start to really kind of have this role and kind of increase tensions there. I think that's one thing that is going to, maybe cause, some new considerations around things like, where is our cloud infrastructure and our data being hosted and things like that.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think for me, Krista, it's really hard to get my head around, would I be comfortable as a US company putting my infrastructure into a cloud provider who's then got strong ties and strong infrastructure deployments in China? I mean, whether you can firewall that off completely, whether they've got access to the network, you'd know this space better than I would. Am I thinking about that in the right way? Those concerns?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we see that with the cloud in general, right? There needs to be trust in terms of that cloud provider and kind of where the infrastructure and data are being hosted, how things are kind of segregated between tenants and things of that nature. We talk with practitioners all the time that say things like, we can't go and move this application, this particular set of data to the cloud, because we need to kind of have that sovereign control over it and things like that. So when you then add in what we've been talking about in terms of these nation state actors and, the political side of things as well, from my standpoint, I think it becomes just another, potential roadblock.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna be the contrarian here a little bit. I think stealing of IP or theft of IP used to be the major inhibitor to doing things in China. And I think the firewall and nation state espionage, cybersecurity activity is real. And we're not angels either, by the way, here at the US or the West, let's be clear. But here's the real deal. The term real politics. The real politics here is we are locked in a war for primacy of this world's economy. And the battlegrounds today are technology, AI, chip production, software. It's not a question of them copying what we got. We don't want to allow them to have our latest chips that they can build on. We don't want to give them, if we can help it, NVIDIA GPUs or Qualcomm chips so they can build a better phone than Apple designs and builds over there, right? Or Google or any of them. This is flat out economic war, right?
Within that, Alan, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying. They have got the strength and the engineering and the smarts to do it. I mean, we have trained them in our colleges. We've shipped them back. They're going back, right? And I only have a small lens of this. I don't track all the technology, but what Huawei has done with their technology is very, very good.
No doubt.
And it's solid. It's screaming stuff. And now they're talking about...
let's call it what it is, Kimberly. It's a threat to us.
Yes, absolutely.
It's so good that it's a threat to our privacy.
And the latest thing they just announced was that they're going to get into the high bandwidth memory. So that was the latest portion that, that's a key technology for AI. So you expect them to do the same thing on the GPU side, and they're developing some stuff on the DPU side, which is the data processing. So from my perspective on the infrastructure, they're going there and they're going to build their own. Now it may take them an extra year or two to get to as a good of a parity of what we develop, but it is a technology arms race, if you will, now.
Kimberly, I think we've also done the same with security, with cyber, right? We haven't talked about that. I would add that to your list, Alan. That's been a threat, been a concern, of course, not only with China, but also Russia and the eastern part of Europe, but really all over the world. I think we're battling multiple fronts of this war, right? And cyber is important not only just from hacking and getting access and controlling and bringing critical infrastructure down and things like that. I think it's also important for where cyber is built into the the infrastructure and the software stack across what we operate, right? So if we're running a bunch of things in China-controlled environments with people from that nation state, there's always a concern about what is the influence that's happening from a cyber perspective, governmental, et cetera, or maybe even competitive from that standpoint. So to me, that is as much about supremacy, because that can bring it all down if we aren't strong there.
I'll add on the cyber front, don't forget North Korea. 25% of North Korea's GDP may in fact be coming from cybersecurity activities and ransomware and so forth. And China kind of looks the other way there. Well, it was 25% before they started selling all their arms to the Russians, right? God knows how much they're making on that. But certainly cyber's in there. Let me end this block, though, on a positive note, guys. Right? I'm a big fan of Thomas Friedman and flat earth and a hot flat earth and all of that. The reason that great firewall exists is at the core of things, the Chinese Communist Party is afraid to let their people live like Americans. Because the fact of the matter is, people in a lot of this world want to live like Americans. Not that they want to wrap themselves in red, white, and blue or wear MAGA hats. Right? That's not necessarily living like an American, but to have the consumption, the lifestyle that Americans and most of the West, right, now enjoy, they're afraid to let their people do that because they're not at the point where they could have 750 million middle-class people living like Americans, consuming like Americans. And if they did, they're not going to want to give that up. Once people have a taste of that, they don't like to give it up. You're seeing it now with the real estate market there starting to implode, right? And they're going to have a real problem on their hands when these people, they don't want to go back to rice fields and mouse suits and stuff like this. And so they've got to keep it clamped down. But once that genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back. And that's going to force them to do some sort of rapprochement, some sort of reconciliation with the West and with the U.S., assuming we had political leadership that wanted to do it as well, because humans are humans, whether they live in China or Washington, D.C. or Moscow or Tel Aviv or London. Humans are humans, and they like to consume things. They like a good life. So anyway, let's hope for the best and that this Cold War just stays cold and not hot, and we can have one internet that rules the world. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong Gang. We'll be back in a minute. Hey, we're back here on Techstrong Gang. Our next block is going to be dedicated to sovereign clouds, managed hosting, but really the whole sovereign cloud issue. Kimberly Bates, I'm going to ask you, Kimberly, if you don't mind, kick it off. This is kind of an area in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of reflect back to a conversation I had, I believe it was 3 years ago, with a major financial institution and chief strategist at that company. And I was chatting with him about cloud and where we were going with this and data sovereignty. And what the person was talking about is that they'd had centralized all of their analysis and work. And they're an international company in terms of the financial work that they were doing. They'd centralized all of their work, particularly because they want to centralize a lot of the data security analysis and the web traffic, et cetera. And now what he was having to do is unwrap this and begin to put the data in the countries where was existing, where data was created, because of anticipating what these countries were going to start saying is that we want the data in our country, and you cannot expatriate that to another country. Or if you do, you have to mask all that data and bring it in. So a brand new architecture. And then what he talked about was the difficulties of unraveling this. And it wasn't just the difficulties of the technology. That was the easy piece of it, even though there was some real challenges in how to move the data around and, all the problems that we have with that movement. The bigger problem was the staff and having the skills, et cetera, that they would have in each one of these places. So that was 3, maybe 4 years ago that I had that conversation, that they were unraveling. And now, a lot has happened in these last, 3-4 years. And so it is not, there's no question that this is moving ahead. And if the cloud providers really want to provide the cloud, they can't just centralize, take economies of scale and have it, just there in Berlin or there in UK. They're going to have to put it in every one of those little countries that they want to exist in. And it seems like the smaller the country, the more they're going to lock down the data, the more they're going to lock and protect the information that is over there. So back to you, Alan, or maybe actually I'm going to pass it over to Steve, because Steve's been really hyping on this quite a bit. So,
yeah, I've been tracking this since January. AWS has invested in Japan. Oracle's invested in Japan. Google's invested in Japan. IBM's invested in Canada. All of these are multi-billion-dollar investments to put infrastructure into locations to go exactly back to what you were just saying, data residency. Yes, we've got this, it's in the cloud is no longer enough. The other piece I'm tracking really closely is a piece of regulation in Europe called DORA, the Digital Operational Resiliency Act. Easy for me to say. And what this is doing is going that next level down. So particularly the UK financial services regulator looked at this type of stuff really closely and said, all of the banks in the UK are moving to the cloud, putting workloads in the cloud. What does that mean? Well, they've got some of it in AWS, they've got some of it in Google, they've got some of it in Microsoft. Oh, that's great. They're all in multi-cloud environments. That reduces the risk. When the regulator went looking, it was really in 2 data centers in London, and it was 3 cloud providers and multiple hosting companies, all in 2 data centers on the outskirts of London. So from a concentration risk, yes, they had a hybrid multi-cloud story. Yes, some of it's in an MSP, some of it's in Azure, some of it's in OCI, some of it's in AWS. Reality, it was in a couple of Equinix data centers. So the regulators start to look at this and they go, well, what happens if something goes wrong with one of those data centers? The UK banking sector is kind of operational risk, geo risk for the UK economy. So I think what we're starting to see, what are we, 18 years into the public cloud now? We're starting to see this next evolution come along, which is we need to have data in particular countries. It goes back to the geopolitical conversation we were having just before the break. The world is kind of bifurcating and isolating. Countries are saying this stuff is crucial, not only just to kind of how we run the country, but also crucial to the economy. Let's get some regulate, and the regulators are catching up, and that's why we're seeing the cloud providers have to invest because they see the trajectory we're on.
I think we're seeing a whole nother kind of layer of this too, Stephen, which is what we refer to as now as sovereign AI. Mm-hmm. Right? The infrastructure that you mentioned, the data earlier, people, workforce, business, et cetera. Just like data, where does our data live in the world, and what are the sovereign, between different nation states and regulatory bodies that want to control that. AI is on the next front. It's already being, discussed in those kinds of regulations. And we'll see more and more of that too. So that's now a big factor because hardware and AI are tied together, not just software and data, along with data as part of our AI models. So I think that's a big part of our conversation, increasingly.
I just see more and more investment on a local level. I see, what have I tracked? I think 5 or 6 different press releases so far this year. I just expect that trend to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the U.S. is not, we started this, right? Remember, GovCloud, right? You couldn't do Fed business if you were storing it on just the regular cloud. They wanted their own cloud, and there was sovereign, issues. And I know GovCloud's got to be 10 years old now or more, right?
We've had FedRAMP certifications.
Yeah, well, FedRAMP up to the GovCloud, exactly, right? So, I mean, why should we be surprised that other countries want to do this too?
Yeah.
Well, and then it gets down to even a more smaller space, which is what we're seeing right now with the AI craze and training. And the enterprises really don't want to move the data off, because once they move to the cloud, there's concern about moving to the cloud. So they're establishing, and this is why we're seeing the earnings coming out of HPE and Dell and probably IBM so strong. It's because they're establishing these systems, the infrastructure systems in-house that they own. And because they're not trusting the sovereignty of their data moving into a cloud, that it would not kind of leak into possibly somebody else's LLM and escape. So there's a lot of protection that's going on in that space. So it's even getting more, granular than just.
Are we going to go back to talking about repatriation again?
No repatriation today.
Alan, you're picking up a topic that's been bubbling on infrastructure matters now.
We can tell.
I see that.
For the last 6 months.
Clearly, some hot red buttons. No one can.
So let me ask you: do we call those private clouds anymore, or is that
I think,
old man thing?
No, it's private. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so we just did a piece of research talking about AI chips, and one of the sort of questions was, how do you deploy this stuff? And it took me and a couple of the other analysts about 3 or 4 meetings to work out all the various different deployment models. Is it a private cloud if it's in an Equinix data center, or a Sirius One, or a Digital Realty data center? Is it private cloud if it's in your data center? What happens if who's managing it? What happens if it's a consumption model like a TrueScale or an Apex or a GreenLake? What happens if that GreenLake's in an Equinix data center? What happens if it's in the public cloud? What happens if it's a outpost that's in your data center, but the control plane is connected? I think some of these. Well, it took us, as I say, about 3 or 4 meetings to make sure we listed all the different deployment models. It's complicated, like a sort of relationship status used to be on Facebook. It's complicated. I think the lines have blurred, Alan, of what is public, private, and hybrid. I think really I just call it hybrid cloud, because if AWS will sell you an outpost that'll sit in your data center, we are very definitely at the point where it's kind of the lines have blurred. AWS wouldn't mention hybrid for the first probably 15 years of their existence. Now they're selling outposts, and a lot of them. So the world's got complicated.
Yeah. I think another factor that we don't mention is as having an influence here was the whole COVID supply chain thing, right? I think a lesson from the COVID pandemic was you got to shorten, it's the logistics stuff. You got to shorten your supply chains. And there's something to be said for having the data center local. Versus in a foreign country, or somewhere where you have less control or what have you, and so I think that kind of maybe factors into here too. The question is, though, I mean, these are not small deals. These are not, oh, I'm putting a couple of $100,000 into building or $2 million into building a data center. These are multi-billion-dollar deals. And that may be fine for Japan. Japan has, what is it, the third or fourth largest economy in the world, probably. I don't know if it plays well for Guyana or name a country maybe that doesn't have an African country or something.
Well, it's interesting, Alan, you mentioned that. I was out with the team at Oracle the other week. What they're doing with Alloy, so that Oracle's got cloud at customer, and they've taken that same sort of model to really make small deployments for sovereign cloud with Alloy. So I think, exactly as you say, if you want to stand up an AWS region or you want to stand up a Google region or a Microsoft region, those are massive investments. Oracle's looking at sovereign cloud a little differently and going, we need to have a sovereign cloud in Azerbaijan, but the market there's not huge. What's the smallest footprint we can put that's still connected and still manageable? And they're doing some good work there. So I think through their cloud at customer sort of connected Exadata type and exascale type stuff, they're really thinking about sovereign cloud. We don't give OCI enough credit, I don't think, when we talk about cloud providers. But I think OCI is thinking about sovereign cloud in a really interesting way for me, exactly to link to what you're saying.
Well, I think there's another piece, the other piece, and I mentioned this before, it's not just the technology that's going on, it's the people. Mm-hmm. And so those tools. So, Alan, to your point, when you look at, Guyana or something like this, a small country like that, and I'm going to build it up, is whether or not you're going to have the economies of scale to build that up. And that economies of scale is both the technology as well as the people. So then the other piece that comes really important is that global management systems that go around. So if I look at how I deploy my staff to function here, things like AI ops kind of items become really important. How I can manage it possibly from a remote, NOC of some sort that I have. And then what kind of people do I need to have on-prem to be able to troubleshoot, take care of those areas. So all those pieces have got to be addressed here when we talk about sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Fair. Absolutely. Hey, guys, if no one has anything else on the sovereign clouds issue, I want to take a quick break. We've got a very interesting development going on in the world of security with IBM and Palo Alto. We're going to come to you, Krista, when we come back to discuss it, okay? You're watching Techstrong Gang and Infrastructure Matters. We'll be back in a moment. Hey, everyone, we're back here on Techstrong Gang. I've heard it said that cybersecurity makes for strange bedfellows. I don't know how strange this hookup is, but it seems that IBM and Palo Alto are getting kind of chummy. Let's run over to Krista Montgomery here and get the scoop. Krista, what do we got?
Sure. Yeah, Alan. So definitely some huge news yesterday, not only for IBM and Palo Alto themselves, but really for the security market as a whole. And building on your comment regarding kind of strange bedfellows, you could certainly look at it a little bit from that perspective. So the news is that Palo Alto Networks is going to acquire QRadar and all of the IP assets associated with it, which when you take a step back and look at it effectively, from a software standpoint, is IBM's security operations center business. So it's their SIM tools, for example. It's their EDR. It is also kind of their SOAR and their threat intelligence as well. So, but really, from my perspective, what it is it's an ongoing move that we've seen in the security operations center where some of these legacy SIM tools, we're starting to encounter some challenges with them. So security analysts are trying to scale their teams as much as they can across this threat landscape that's dynamic. It's changing all the time. And so what they need intelligence that is really supported by analytics and artificial intelligence, and really helps them to kind of pinpoint the most critical vulnerabilities, and also really kind of accelerates their ability to respond to the vulnerabilities, and also to kind of investigate and to triage incidents when they do occur. So that's sort of one side of the coin. And then another side of the coin as well is being able to have visibility beyond kind of just your traditional log analytics. So looking at kind of your cloud environment, looking more broadly across the network to get more comprehensive visibility, because again, these threats are evolving in terms of kind of how attackers are getting into the network. So I bring all this up because these SIM tools are starting to experience some competition from, you have your XDR tools, your SOAR tools. These are kind of two of the key general camps that we're seeing kind of add some pressure from these SIM tools. So really what this is a move from, again, Palo Alto, which does provide XDR and SOAR capabilities, and they're going to take the QRadar, kind of assets. And really what they're going to do is they're going to work to kind of migrate that customer base onto the Palo Alto tools. So again, it's kind of, from my perspective, really a reflection on where the market is heading.
Mitchell, any thoughts?
Yeah, to add on to Krista's perspective there, when we think about acquisition of companies and in these spaces, this is a customer acquisition, a customer base acquisition, right, that Krista's describing. So it's buying the business. In exchange, we'll do these other things for IBM, and we'll cooperate on AI kind of in the future, future statement to operate.
I think those are the key to sort of add on. I think there's two pieces to this for me. And Krista and I wrote a research note on this week. There's the QRadar business to move into Palo Alto, but there's another side to this alliance. IBM's going to train 1,000 people in its consulting organization. That's probably going to mean that IBM Consulting becomes probably the best place to go if you want to do a Palo Alto implementation. Yep. Also means IBM's going to standardize on Palo Alto internally.
Exactly.
So they're going to have eaten their own dog food. I hate that phrase, but I can't think of a better one. But they're going to have got that expertise with doing a huge migration to Palo Alto, and then they'll be able to talk about that from a consulting point of view. And then the final piece is that Palo Alto is going to standardize on IBM's large language models for some of the stuff that Krista was talking about from an AI perspective. So I think the headline piece is that QRadar's and the install base of QRadar is going to move to Palo Alto. But I think there's some goodness in this for IBM. One thing that wasn't mentioned was how much money's changing hands. Yeah. IBM's going to have a HashiCorp debt to pay down once that acquisition closes. I got a chance to ask Roger Primo, who runs strategy for IBM, the question, should we be looking at this transfer as a further clarification of IBM's strategy around hybrid cloud and AI? He was emphatic in his answer of yes, because I think IBM was kind of a big player in security, but it was hard for them to fit it with their strategic focus on hybrid cloud and AI. That distraction's gone away now for sure.
Well, that's part of the two-way of thinking about this is buying the business, right? Because Palo Alto is buying the business of operationally IBM using Palo Alto products. So there's revenue in that from them. And then as you were mentioning about AI, that Palo Alto is using the Watson large language model for what we don't know yet. But there's a lot of back and forth here. So you can kind of see it's almost like an operational deal in some ways, as well as a BD deal, especially for Palo Alto to have all those number of people trained on their products as well. So it's not your typical, let's sign a contract between our companies. It's kind of a two-way street with multiple.
No. This is a business developer's dream deal.
It is, yeah.
I'd love that. Stephen, is it IBM Consulting or is Kyndryl involved in this as well?
So those guys have been separate companies now for 2 years and a quarter. I think Kyndryl's got a good relationship with Palo Alto on their own, but this is definitely what's in scope of the announcement is IBM Consulting.
So let me just a little perspective here. I knew the Q Radar guys before IBM bought them, right? I was never a huge sim fan, but ArcSight and Q Radar were the best of the sims. And of course, HP bought ArcSight and IBM bought Q Radar. For the last however many years it's been, 10 years, whatever, Q Radar has been the core of IBM security. And though IBM may not be known as the leading security provider, make no mistake, they're a major enterprise security provider. Cisco as well, right? Cisco and IBM, maybe two of the biggest security, though they're not pure play, two of the biggest security players out there. If you're an IBM security person right now, your resumes are out on the street.
Well, I don't know whether there's a transfer of talent going to happen as well to Palo Alto.
There might be some, but Palo Alto didn't have a stellar quarter, right? Their stock they got hammered last quarter. They didn't, and I don't see them hiring a whole bunch of people here.
So on that, one thing I'm personally pretty interested in is, so the IBM X-Force threat intelligence team is good, from my understanding, is going to be going over to Palo Alto.
Really? Now,
right.
Palo Alto has their own threat research team, Code 42 or whatever it is.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how those teams sort of integrate, especially where, I know at least from the IBM standpoint, that team has so much longstanding expertise. I know their the X-Force Threat Intelligence Report, that comes out every year for, 15 years now or something like that.
Longer than that.
Yeah, become almost a de facto standard in terms of understanding how threats are moving and evolving. So that kind of jumped out to me as I'm really
interested. That is huge. I didn't realize X-Force was going. So X-Force actually came from the ISS acquisition in like 2002 or 2004, something like that. Right. And it's been there ever since. And it was X-Force, back when it was ISS even, was the model for these threat research teams.
So Alan, here's my question is, where's observability in all this? Is this moving around the deck chairs of SIMs in the security world? Because that is also being attacked by like the Splunk acquisition by Cisco, right? Taking things, there's SIM and then there's observability. At least we talk about it that way in the non-security.
So for me, does that mean Dynatrace is on the market as an acquisition for Palo Alto? Wouldn't surprise me.
Somebody's got to respond to Cisco's move. So clearly it's not going to be IBM. At least
IBM seems to be divesting security, right? As a practice there. I'm just surprised they didn't sell it to HCL. Yeah. No, just a little joke.
I see what you did.
Joke.
So they are divesting security, but they're not divesting data security.
Yeah,
so I'm just going to say that from an infrastructure matters standpoint, the Z is probably is the most advanced system in the world. They have led the effort on all the data security items in terms of their top line DS8000 and their flash system in terms of delivery. They're working to harden up the rest of the recoverability and all that kind of thing that's going on, but so this is quite curious because a lot of that work came out of IBM research. Yeah. And how those groups kind of mesh together, I am not clear. Maybe Ms. Krista has more understanding of that space, but there's two sides to this pieces of it that's going to be, and I'd be very curious to see what's going on with IBM research because that they've had a huge impact on buttoning down things in terms of the cybersecurity attacks.
Yeah, it's a great point, Kimberly. And at this point, it's not clear, kind of any delineations on the research side, aside from kind of what I mentioned regarding X-Force for threat intelligence. But what I will add is, you kind of talk about, the Z, and you talk about everything that IBM is doing in terms of hardening their system. Certainly we see that on the flash system as well, for example, but also the investment that they've made, for example, with Cohesity for IBM Storage Defender on more the resiliency and the recovery side of things. So certainly far from saying that IBM is exiting all of security. Obviously, that's certainly not the case. They're still going to have those components and those plays. What it appears to me is that they're kind of moving away from the SOC, away from the Security Operations Center.
Interestingly, Mitchell, you spoke about the Cisco move. While we were at RSA, I had a quick chance to catch up. I forget her name right now, but she's the AT&T cybersecurity division got spun out with a new name and everything, and I think they took in some private money. Are we seeing the bloom off the rose in cybersecurity, and these large enterprises that don't do cyber for a living are looking to kind of isolate away from it? Steven, you're shaking your head.
I mean,
Alan, it's a platform play.
Yeah,
I mean, Krista, I'll come to you after, because I'm keen to get your perspective, but you're going to see Palo Alto, you're going to see CrowdStrike, you're going to see Fortinet, these big players that are well-funded, Cisco, you're going to see these big platform plays. I think what we've seen, and Krista, I want to come to you, RSA is just hundreds and hundreds of small vendors doing one thing really well. And IT and CISO teams just can't work with that many vendors. I mean, what you were out there at RSA. What did you pick up the same?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Stephen. From a customer perspective, I mean, in a given enterprise, you're going to have dozens of security tools that are in use. And it's just becoming practically impossible, right, for security analysts and SOC teams to work with. So we're looking at trying to consolidate amongst vendors, but also to the point of the platform play, the number of tools that they're working with within a given vendor. So one company that I met with comes to mind is a company called Fortra. They've been around, I think they said, over 20 years, even longer than that, actually, I think, if my memory serves me correctly. But they had sort of point plays across, managed detection and response, for example. And their big announcement at RSA was we now have a platform play where if you want to buy piecemeal, you still can, but now we have a way to deliver to you a more comprehensive platform approach to address just, the complexity of that tool chain.
Guys, we're overtime. We're going to end up here in a second, but I'll tell you this. In 25 years in security, you know what I learned? R&D happens in those small companies, and they're there at RSA. They're flirting their stuff as much for end users, customers, as they are to the IBMs and Ciscos and big acquirers of the world, because that's where those large companies go to buy innovation.
Fair point. Very fair.
And that's where they come from. Anyway, guys, we're overtime. I've got to run into we're in Studio A here. I got to run into Studio B and do another video. But man, what a great first time we've had here doing Infrastructure Matters meets Techstrong Gang. I feel like I've had chocolate with my peanut butter. Krista, Camberly, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. We'll do this again soon, but we'll also have each of you on Gang and other Techstrong TV activities going forward. Thanks a bunch, Mitchell. Always good to have you on, my friend.
And it's been great to have that.
It was. This was a great discussion. We were a little bit all over the world. We went, spanning the globe, as they used to say. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. We'll be back tomorrow with another fresh Techstrong Gang. Immediately following this, though, we've probably got another 3 or 4 hours of Techstrong TV for you to watch, so don't miss that. But until next time, this is Alan Schimmel from Mitchell Ashley, Krista Maycumber, Camberly Bates, and Stephen Dickens. You've just watched Techstrong Gang.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.